Major Rob Callahan hadn't left his property in the mountains of rural Virginia in over 14 months. The small wooden cabin, set back a quarter mile from the nearest dirt road, suited him just fine. At 42, with 20 years of military service behind him, all he wanted now was to be left alone. The early morning sun filtered through the pine trees as Rob sat on his porch, coffee mug in hand, his service dog Delta, a patient German shepherd, lying at his feet. The right side of Rob's face remained in shadow, not by accident but by habit. The explosion that had ended his military career had left more than just internal scars. "Another day, another dollar," he muttered to Delta, though his military pension meant he didn't need to work. The dog's ears perked up, her head tilting at the sound of his voice, a voice that rarely spoke to anyone else these days. The chirping of his phone broke the morning silence. Rob frowned. Only 3 people had this number: his VA doctor, his sister Kate, and his old commanding officer. He let it ring 4 times before reluctantly answering. "Rob? It's Kate." His sister's voice sounded strained. "I need to ask you something important. If this story is already stirring something inside you, don't scroll past it. Tap like and subscribe to No Filter America, where forgotten hearts and hidden heroes finally get seen." "Absolutely not." Rob's voice was firm as he paced the small confines of his cabin. "You know I don't do people anymore. Please, Rob. Sarah doesn't have anyone else," Kate pleaded through the phone. "Her father passed away 3 months ago. There's no other family." Rob ran his hand over the stubble on his face, careful to avoid the scar tissue on the right side. "Kate, I haven't even met your friend. I haven't been to town in over a year. I can't just show up at a wedding. Sarah is more than my friend. She's like a daughter to me. I've known her since she was 10, after her mother died." Kate paused before adding, "And she specifically asked for you." Rob stopped pacing. "What? Why would she ask for me? She doesn't even know me. I've told her about you, about your service, your medals, what kind of man you are." Kate's voice softened. "She's blind, Rob, has been since birth. She said she wants someone honorable to walk her down the aisle, someone who would have made her father proud." The silence stretched between them until Kate added, "She doesn't care what you look like, Rob. She can't see your scars." Rob felt something twist in his chest, a feeling he thought he'd buried along with his old life. "I'll think about it," he said finally, and hung up. Chapter 3. Ghosts of the past that night. Rob couldn't sleep. Delta sensed his restlessness, staying close as he moved from bed to chair to porch and back again. It had been 2 years since the IED in Afghanistan had killed 3 of his men and left him with shrapnel embedded in his face, neck, and right arm. The physical recovery had been grueling but straightforward. The psychological wounds were different. The stares from strangers, the looks of pity or poorly disguised revulsion, those had driven him deeper into isolation until the cabin became his entire world. Rob found himself standing before the single mirror in his bathroom, something he usually avoided. He turned on the light and forced himself to look. The right side of his face was a landscape of puckered skin and uneven texture, his right ear partially missing, his hairline interrupted by a jagged scar that ran to his temple. Some escort for a bride, he said bitterly to his reflection. On his dresser sat a dusty, folded American flag, and the Purple Heart he'd received but never displayed. Beside them was a photograph of his unit before the explosion. Young men smiling, unaware of what awaited them. Rob picked up the photo, his finger tracing the faces of the 3 who hadn't come home. "What would you do?" he asked their silent images. "Would you hide away like a coward, or would you help this woman?" Delta whined softly, pressing against his leg, as if sensing his internal struggle. Rob put the photo down and reached for his phone. It was nearly midnight, but he knew his sister would still be awake. "Kate," he said when she answered, his voice rough with emotion, "tell me more about this bride." Chapter 4. A reluctant visit a week later, Rob found himself behind the wheel of his rarely used truck, Delta in the passenger seat, heading toward his sister's house in Riverton. His hands gripped the steering wheel, so tightly his knuckles turned white every time another vehicle passed. Just a meeting, he reminded himself. No commitment. He'd agreed to meet Sarah, nothing more. Kate had been ecstatic, talking about how much it would mean to her friend. Rob had spent 3 days preparing, trimming his overgrown beard, washing clothes that smelled of mothballs, practicing basic conversations aloud to Delta, who listened with patient canine attention. As he pulled into Kate's driveway, his sister was already waiting on the porch. Her smile faltered slightly when she saw him, a reaction he'd grown accustomed to, but quickly returned as she approached the truck. "You came," she said, leaning in to hug him through the window. "I wasn't sure you would." "Neither was I," Rob admitted, turning off the engine. Delta whined softly beside him. "Is she here?" Kate nodded. "She's inside. Just be yourself, Rob." He almost laughed at that. Who was himself anymore? The decorated soldier? The recluse? The man who couldn't look at his own reflection without wincing? He took a deep breath and stepped out of the truck, Delta following closely at his heel. Chapter 5. Meeting Sarah in the living room was bright and airy, nothing like the deliberate darkness of Rob's cabin. A young woman sat on the sofa, her posture straight, hands folded neatly in her lap. Her eyes, a pale blue, looked toward the sound of their footsteps but didn't focus on them. "Sarah, my brother Rob is here," Kate announced, "and his dog, Delta." Sarah smiled, her face lighting up. She was pretty, Rob thought, in her late 20s with auburn hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, wearing a casual blue dress. Not what he had expected. "Major Callahan," she said, extending her hand slightly off-center. "Thank you for coming. I've heard so much about you." Rob hesitated before taking her hand. "Just Rob now. Haven't been Major for a while. Once a Marine, always a Marine. Isn't that what they say?" Sarah's smile was warm as she released his hand. "May I meet Delta?" "She's a service dog," Rob said, trained to stay focused on me. "Of course," Sarah nodded. "Kate mentioned you were injured in Afghanistan." Rob shot his sister a look, but Kate had conveniently disappeared into the kitchen. "Yes," he said simply, lowering himself into an armchair across from Sarah. 2 years ago." Sarah tilted her head slightly. "I hope you don't mind me saying, but you have a strong presence. I can feel it from across the room." Rob shifted uncomfortably. "Kate says you need someone to walk you down the aisle. I'd like you to consider it, yes." Sarah's expression grew more serious. "My father was a Vietnam veteran. He would have appreciated another serviceman taking his place." Chapter 6. Unexpected understanding. Kate served lunch on the patio, then made an excuse about errands, leaving Rob and Sarah alone. The silence stretched uncomfortably until Delta broke it by moving to rest her head on Sarah's knee. "Your dog has decided I'm trustworthy," Sarah said, carefully finding Delta's head with her hand. "She doesn't usually do that with strangers," Rob admitted, watching in surprise. "Animals sense things differently than humans. They don't judge based on appearances." Sarah's fingers gently stroked Delta's fur. "I understand something about being judged based on what people see or think they see." Rob studied her. "Being blind isn't the same as—" He trailed off. "As having scars." Sarah finished for him. "Maybe not, but I do know what it's like to have people make assumptions about your capabilities, to speak to you differently, to treat you as less than whole." Her directness caught him off guard. "Kate told you about my injuries." "She told me you were wounded inside and out," Sarah confirmed. "She also told me you were the bravest man she knew, and not just because of your military service." Rob snorted. "Brave men don't hide in cabins in the woods." "Sometimes they do," Sarah countered. "Sometimes that's exactly what they do until they're ready to come out again." She paused, then added more softly, "My fiancé, Daniel, lost his leg in Iraq. First tour. He understands something about wanting to hide." The revelation hung between them. Rob felt something shift inside him, the recognition of a shared experience, even if the details differed. "When's the wedding?" he asked finally. 6 weeks from Saturday," Sarah replied, a hint of hope in her voice. "At the lakeside chapel. Small ceremony, just 40 guests." Rob took a deep breath. "I'm not promising anything, but I'll think about it. Really think about it this time." Sarah nodded, her expression gentle. That's all I'm asking for. A chance for both of us to see if this feels right. As the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the patio, Rob realized he'd been in someone else's company for nearly 3 hours, the longest social interaction he'd had in almost 2 years. And strangely, he didn't feel the desperate need to escape that he'd anticipated. Chapter 7. Steps forward 2 weeks passed before Rob returned to Kate's house. This time, he'd called ahead progress. Kate had noted with cautious optimism. Sarah's at work. Kate explained as she led him inside. She teaches music at the school for the blind in Richmond. Piano, mainly. Rob nodded, absorbing this new piece of information. I brought something, he said, awkwardly holding out a small flash drive. For Sarah. It's some recordings. Military marches that might work for the wedding. I remembered you said her father was military. Kate took the flash drive, her expression softening. You're considering it, then? I went for a haircut yesterday, Rob said instead of answering directly. The trip to the barber in the small town nearest his cabin had been excruciating. The first time he'd willingly put himself under the gaze of strangers in nearly 2 years. Kate noticed his newly trimmed hair and the cleanly shaved left side of his face. The right side still bore a beard that partially covered his scars. It was a compromise, but a significant one. Daniel's coming over for dinner tomorrow, she said carefully. Sarah's fiancé. He asked if he might join us. Veteran to veteran. Rob tensed visibly, but after a moment's hesitation, he gave a short nod. What time? As he drove home, Rob realized he'd just agreed to a social dinner, something that would have been unthinkable a month ago. Delta sat beside him, and he could have sworn the dog looked pleased. Don't get too excited, he told her. We're just gathering intelligence. But even as he said it, Rob knew something had changed. The thought of meeting another wounded veteran, someone who might understand without pity, stirred a feeling he hadn't experienced in years. Curiosity about another human being. Chapter 8. Brothers in Arms. So there I was, hopping around on one leg, try to convince the TSA agent that my prosthetic wasn't a weapon. Daniel concluded his story, grinning as Kate and Sarah laughed. Rob found himself smiling too, an unfamiliar sensation. Daniel Mills was not what he had expected. The former Army corporal was outgoing and quick to joke, even about his missing leg. At 32, he was a physical therapist who specialized in working with injured veterans. The first year's the hardest, Daniel said later, when the two men were alone on the porch. You think it defines you forever. Rob stared into his coffee. Some wounds are harder to ignore than others. Daniel nodded. Took me 3 years before I could wear shorts in public. Now I have different prosthetics for different occasions. Even have one with flames painted on it for when I'm feeling fancy. He paused. Sarah helped with that, accepting myself. How'd you meet? Rob asked. VA hospital, if you can believe it. I was doing my residency. She was volunteering, playing piano for the long-term patients. Daniel's expression grew serious. She never saw my injury. She just heard my voice, listened to my stupid jokes, and somehow decided I was worth knowing. Rob was quiet for a moment. She asked him to walk her down the aisle because her father died. Partly, Daniel acknowledged, but also because of who you are. She has this way of sensing people, their character. He hesitated before adding, she's been worried about you, man, even though she just met you. She doesn't know me, Rob protested. Maybe not, Daniel conceded, but she knows what it's like when people look at you and only see what's missing or different. He stood, adjusting his prosthetic leg. Think about the wedding. It would mean a lot to her, and maybe to you too. As Daniel walked back inside, Rob remained on the porch, looking up at the stars, suddenly aware that this was the longest conversation he'd had with anyone besides Kate since before the explosion. Chapter 9. The rehearsal. The bride and her escort will enter from these doors, the wedding coordinator explained, pointing toward the back of the chapel. You'll walk at a steady pace down the center aisle. I've marked the floor with subtle texture changes, so Sarah can feel them through her shoes. Cues for pacing. Rob nodded, impressed by the thoughtfulness of the accommodations. The chapel was small but beautiful, with wooden pews and stained glass windows that cast colorful patterns across the floor. He'd arrived early for the rehearsal, before the other guests, at Sarah's request. "Are you sure about this?" he asked when they were alone, his voice low. "It's not too late to ask someone else. Someone who's whole." Sarah turned toward his voice, her expression firm. "You are whole, Robert Callahan. Different than before, perhaps, but whole." Before he could respond, she reached up, her movements careful but confident. "May I?" He realized what she was asking and froze. No one besides medical professionals had touched his scars since the injury. "You don't have to," she said softly, sensing his hesitation. Something in her voice, the absence of pity, the presence of simple human connection, made him take her wrist and guide her hand to his face. "Go ahead." Sarah's fingers were gentle as they traced the landscaper's right cheek, the uneven texture of scarred skin, the place where his ear was partially missing. Her expression remained unchanged, no shock, no revulsion, just concentration as she created a mental image. "Thank you for trusting me," she said when she was done, lowering her hand. "My father had scars too, from Vietnam. Different texture, but he always said they were just geography. They mapped where he'd been, not who he was." Rob cleared his throat, fighting an unexpected surge of emotion. "Your father sounds like a wise man. He would have liked you," Sarah said simply. "That's why this matters to me. Walking with you feels like having a piece of him there, too." The chapel doors opened as other wedding party members began to arrive. Rob offered his arm to Sarah in the proper escort position they would use during the ceremony. "Ready to practice?" he asked. Sarah smiled as she took his arm. "I think we both have been practicing for this moment for longer than we realize." Chapter 10. Facing the crowd the week before the wedding, Rob found himself in an unexpected place, the local tailor shop in Riverton. The elderly owner, Mr. Abernathy, took his measurements with professional efficiency, making no comment about the scars visible above Rob's collar. "Black suit or navy?" the tailor asked, jotting down numbers. "I have my dress uniform," Rob replied hesitantly, "but I haven't worn it since." Mr. Abernathy nodded, understanding. "Military man myself, Korea. Navy suit would look distinguished. Complement the bride's colors according to your sister." As the tailor pinned fabric around him, Rob caught sight of himself in the three-way mirror, an unavoidable confrontation with his appearance from every angle. He quickly looked away, his heart racing. "Young man," Mr. Abernathy said, noticing his reaction, "I've dressed men for every occasion, births, deaths, celebrations, mourning. Clothes don't make the man, but they can remind a man who he is." Rob met the older man's eyes in the mirror. "And who am I?" "Someone important enough to stand beside a bride on the most significant day of her life," Mr. Abernathy replied simply. "That's not nothing." Later, as Rob drove home with Delta, the suit carefully hung in the back seat, he found himself taking the long route through town instead of the back roads he usually favored. At a stoplight, a woman in the next car glanced over. He tensed, waiting for the familiar look of shock or pity, but she merely smiled politely before returning her attention to the road. Just a normal interaction. No drama. No trauma. Rob released a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "Baby steps," he murmured to Delta, who wagged her tail in agreement. Chapter 11. The night before Cold Feet? Kate asked, finding Rob sitting alone on her back porch the night before the wedding. He'd agreed to stay at her house rather than drive back to the cabin. Rob shook his head. "Not my wedding." Still, Kate sat beside him. Big day tomorrow. Lots of people. The rehearsal dinner had been small, just a wedding party and immediate family. But tomorrow would bring 40 guests, all strangers to Rob except for Kate, Sarah, and Daniel. "I'm not backing out," Rob said firmly. "I gave my word." Kate studied her brother's profile, the porch light illuminating the unmarred left side of his face. "You know, when you first came home, I was just happy you were alive. Then I watched you disappear into that cabin, into yourself, and I started to wonder if the brother I knew was still in there." Rob turned to face her directly, his scarred side now visible. "And now I see him coming back," Kate said, her eyes bright with unshed tears. Maybe different, but still Rob. A comfortable silence settled between them before Rob spoke again. I talked to my VA counselor yesterday. First time in months. Kate raised her eyebrows but said nothing, giving him space to continue. He thinks the wedding, being around people again, it's exposure therapy. Rob gave a short laugh. Said sometimes the best therapy doesn't happen in an office. Is it helping? Kate asked carefully. Rob considered the question. The anxiety was still there, the hypervigilance, the instinct to turn a scarred side away from people. But alongside those familiar responses was something new, a growing capacity to push through the discomfort. Ask me tomorrow night, he finally answered. Inside the house, they could hear Sarah playing the piano, a gentle melody that floated through the open windows. Tomorrow she would be a wife, and Rob would stand in for her father, a role he still didn't feel worthy but was determined to fulfill. She's good, Rob commented, listening to the music. She's extraordinary, Kate corrected, in more ways than one. Chapter 12. The wedding morning, Rob woke to the sound of rain against the guest room window. The forecast had predicted clearing by ceremony time, but the gray morning cast a somber mood as he made his way downstairs. He found Sarah alone in the kitchen, her fingers trailing along the countertops as she navigated the familiar space with practiced ease. Major Callahan, she greeted him, turning toward the sound of his footsteps. Coffee's fresh. Cups are in the cabinet above the machine. You're up early, Rob observed, reaching for a mug. Nervous? Sarah smiled. Excited, though I admit I barely slept. She was already dressed in lounge clothes, her hair in a loose bun. The hairdresser arrives at 10, then the makeup artist, then hours of what my bridesmaids assure me is necessary preparation. Rob leaned against the counter, studying her calm demeanor. You seem very certain. About Daniel? Sarah's smile widened. I am. When you can't see someone, you have to trust other senses. The way they speak to others when they think no one important is listening. The way they handle frustration. The way they breathe when they're happy. She paused. Daniel is a good man. Like you. Rob shifted uncomfortably at the comparison. You hardly know me. I know enough, Sarah countered gently. The way you push yourself beyond comfort for a stranger's wedding. The respect in Daniel's voice when he talks about meeting you. The way Delta's nails sound on the floor when she follows you. Relaxed, not anxious. She tilted her head. We all have different ways of seeing, Major. The kitchen door swung open as Kate entered, already dressed for the day's preparations. Good. You're both up. The florist just called. There's short one boutonniere, and the bakery might be late with the cake. Wedding day chaos commencing. As Kate launched into coordinator mode, Rob caught Sarah's amused expression. She leaned closer to him and whispered, This is why I'm glad I asked you to walk me down the aisle. You military men stay calm in a crisis. Rob found himself chuckling, a rusty, unfamiliar sound that nonetheless felt good. We're trained for combat, not wedding emergencies. Same difference, Sarah replied with a grin. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to become a bride. She navigated her way out of the kitchen with practiced ease, leaving Rob to wonder at her confidence, not just in her movement despite her blindness, but in her choice to include him in one of the most important moments of her life. Chapter 13. The moment of truth the lakeside chapel glowed in the afternoon sunlight that had finally broken to the morning clouds. Guests filled the pews, their excited chatter creating a low hum that penetrated the small room where Rob waited with Sarah. Rob stood in his navy suit, a subtle American flag pin on his lapel, a compromise between civilian attire and acknowledging his service. Delta sat perfectly still beside him, wearing a special vest that identified her as a service animal, a small sprig of baby's breath attached to her collar. How do I look? Sarah asked, turning slowly in her wedding dress, an elegant ivory gown with delicate lace sleeves and a modest train. Her auburn hair was arranged in a classic updo, adorned with small white flowers. Beautiful, Rob answered truthfully. Daniel's a lucky man. Sarah smiled, reaching out until her fingers found his arm. The coordinator says we have about 5 minutes. How are you holding up? Rob took a deep breath. 40 people waited on the other side of that door. 40 pairs of eyes that would see his scars, his damaged face. The familiar anxiety tightened his chest. "I'm fine," he lied. "Your voice says otherwise," Sarah observed gently. "It's okay to be scared, Major. I'm a little scared, too." "You?" Rob asked, surprised. "You seem so certain about everything." Sarah's fingers tightened slightly on his arm. "Not everything, just the important things." She paused. "My father used to say courage isn't about not being afraid. It's about being afraid and doing what matters anyway." The wedding coordinator peeked in. 2 minutes. After she left, Sarah turned her face toward Rob. "Can I tell you something? When I asked Kate if he would walk me down the aisle, it wasn't just because I needed someone to replace my father." "No," Rob asked. "No," Sarah confirmed. "It was also because I thought maybe we could help each other take a difficult step." Her voice softened. "You've been hiding from the world. Today, you're helping me step into a new life. Maybe this is your first step back into yours." Before Rob could respond, the music changed. Their cue, the coordinator reappeared, opening the door fully. "Ready?" Sarah asked. Rob placed her hand in the proper position on his arm and straightened his shoulders, a military posture ingrained by years of service. "Ready." Chapter 14. Down the aisle as the doors opened, all heads turned. Rob felt the weight of 40 gazes like a physical pressure. His instinct was to turn the scarred side of his face away, to shield himself from their scrutiny. Instead, he kept his head high, focused straight ahead where Daniel stood waiting at the altar. The first step was the hardest, the second only slightly easier. By the third, Rob became aware of Sarah's hand, steady on his arm, her steps matching as perfectly as they moved in unison. He expected whispers, perhaps even gasps at his appearance. Instead, he saw smiles, not of pity but of genuine joy for the bride. A few people wiped away tears, their attention focused not on his scars, but on Sarah's radiant presence. They weren't seeing him, Rob realized. Or rather, they saw him, but not in the way he had feared. They saw a proud escort walking a beautiful bride down the aisle. His scars were secondary to his role in this moment. Halfway down the aisle, an elderly man in a wheelchair, another veteran, judging by the pin on his jacket, gave Rob a subtle nod of recognition, a mutual acknowledgement between men who understood sacrifice. As they approached the altar, Rob glanced at Daniel, whose eyes were fixed on his bride with a look of complete adoration. The young man stood tall despite the prosthetic leg Rob knew was hidden beneath his pant leg. When they reached the front, the minister asked, "Who gives this woman to be married?" The traditional question hung in the air for a moment before Rob answered in a clear, steady voice. "She walks with me in honor of her father, who will be proud to witness this day." Sarah squeezed his arm in gratitude for the personalized response. Rob then carefully placed her hand in Daniel's waiting grasp, completing his duty with a sense of profound accomplishment. As he stepped aside to take his seat in the front row next to Kate, Rob realized something extraordinary. For those few minutes, walking down the aisle, he had completely forgotten about his scars. Chapter 15. New Beginnings of Reception was held in a renovated barn near the chapel, decorated with twinkling lights and wildflowers. Rob had planned to make a brief appearance before slipping away. His agreement had been to walk Sarah down the aisle, not to socialize for hours afterward. Yet somehow, one conversation led to another. Daniel's physical therapy colleagues asked respectful questions about his military service. Sarah's music students were fascinated by Delta and her training. The elderly veteran from the ceremony shared stories from Vietnam that made Rob nod in understanding. "You're a natural," Kate commented, finding him during a quiet moment on the edge of the dance floor. "At what?" Rob asked. "Being human again," she replied simply. Before he could respond, Sarah approached, navigating the space with the help of a discreet ribbon attached to Daniel's jacket sleeve, a system they had developed for crowded settings. "Major Callahan," she said warmly. "Daniel and I have a favor to ask." Rob raised an eyebrow. "Another one?" Sarah laughed. "This one's smaller. We're having a small gathering at our place next month. Just a casual dinner to thank those who made today special. Would you come?" A month ago, such an invitation would have been met with an immediate refusal. 2 weeks ago, reluctant consideration. Now, Rob found himself nodding. "I'd like that," he said, surprising himself with how much he meant it. As the evening drew to a close, Rob found himself standing outside the barn, looking up at the stars. Delta sat patiently beside him, her presence a constant comfort. "Major?" Sarah's voice came from behind him. She'd changed from her wedding gown into a simpler dress for traveling. "We're about to leave for the airport. I wanted to say goodbye." "Congratulations, Mrs. Mills," Rob said. "It was a beautiful wedding." "Because you were brave enough to be part of it," Sarah replied. She reached out, and when Rob took her hand, she pulled him into a gentle hug. "Thank you for seeing me down the aisle." "Thank you," Rob said quietly, "for helping me see myself again." After Sarah and Daniel departed amid cheers and thrown flower petals, Rob and Delta walked to his truck. The night air was cool and fresh, filled with the scent of pine from the surrounding woods. Tomorrow, he would return to his cabin in the mountains. But as he drove away from the reception, Rob realized the solitude that had once felt like a sanctuary now seemed more like a temporary resting place, not a permanent retreat from life. His phone buzzed with text from Kate. "Proud of you today. Love you." Next to it was a notification from the VA office confirming his appointment with his counselor next week. And below that, a message from Daniel with the date of their dinner invitation and a casual postscript. "By the way, the rec center needs a swimming instructor for disabled vets on Thursdays. Thought of you." Rob set the phone aside and focused on the road ahead. Delta dozing peacefully in the passenger seat. For the first time in 2 years, the future didn't feel like an empty void to be endured. Instead, it felt like a path, perhaps difficult and winding, but one worth walking. Just like the aisle he had traveled today, each step would get easier than the last, and he wouldn't be walking it alone. Now, tell us, would you have walked her down the aisle? Drop your answer in the comments. And if this story stayed with you, hit like, subscribe to No Filter America, and help us bring more untold stories into the light.